Have you ever seen this photo? Maybe this one. Maybe you're in this one. Chances are, if you live in Ontario or even the Northeast United States, you've likely either appeared in one of these photos yourself, or, more likely, seen one on a friend or family member's Facebook timeline, Twitter page, Instagram, or if you're beginning to feel elderly, MySpace page. But if you don't know where these photos come from already, they are in fact all from one location. And if you did already know where these photos come from, which you also probably could have guessed from the title of this video, you know this is the legendary Nightmare Sphere Factory in Niagara Falls, Ontario. A haunted attraction so notorious that it's garnered global fame for its intensity, as well as for being located in a former coffin factory. Or is it? Its actual roots are much more humble, but no less interesting. I'm Alex Crew, and this is the third episode of Canadian Amusement History, and our first episode of many covering the history of a haunted attraction. The beginning of our story takes us all the way back to 1966, and all the way across Lake Ontario from the Niagara region to an old farmhouse in Oshawa. It was here that a charity organization opened a seasonal Halloween spook house which ran for the days leading up to Halloween. Working in that charity organization and majorly involved in the haunt was 26-year-old Robert Gibbs, or as his family and his many friends better knew him, Bobber. The haunted house was a success, and was moved to a farmhouse in Whitby the following Halloween, where it proved to be even more popular. Gibbs worked at the General Motors factory in Oshawa, but eventually left to pursue a successful career in corporate business, making the Durham College Dean's List and going on to work for the Canadian divisions of companies like Revlon and Coca-Cola. Through it all, he never forgot the success of the charity spook house, and the concept of operating a Halloween haunt out of an actual old house. Brainstorming the potential of a more modern version of the concept, he would revisit it for the 1980 Halloween season, and open a seasonal haunt of his own as a business. Like the charity spook house, Gibbs' new professional haunt would operate in an old farmhouse in Markham, on the northwest corner of the Warden and Steeles intersection, literally across the street from the Scarborough borough of Toronto. It would be named 13 Rooms of Terror, and it moved through 13 rooms of the renovated house, each with a different theme or scare, and would be open for all of October. The location practically in the city made the haunt even more popular than Gibbs' setups in the 60s, and it would return in the same location the following year since Gibbs owned the building. It would prove to be so popular that Gibbs began to contemplate the profitability of turning his ideas into full-time haunted attractions, and he would do just that in 1982. Gibbs would open his first permanent haunted attraction as a concession at Prudhomme's Landing, an amusement park in Lincoln on the shores of Lake Ontario, just inside the Niagara region. Prudhomme's Landing was named after the Prudhomme family who had first developed the land and built a farm and mansion on the plot. The family eventually built a hotel on the land in 1948, hoping to cash in on weary travelers on their way to Niagara Falls from elsewhere in Ontario during the post-war automotive boom. With its perfect location and picturesque views of Lake Ontario, the hotel had expanded to a full resort by 1960, and by the 1970s, a full-blown amusement park was built next to the hotel. By 1982, the old Prudhomme mansion was long abandoned, and made the perfect location for Gibbs' first permanent attraction. In a win-win for both Gibbs and the park, he would operate the attraction there as a private concession, meaning the park was now making money off the decrepit old house, and Gibbs had his creepy old mansion to renovate as he pleased. He would fittingly dub it the Haunted House, renovating the old Prudhomme mansion into his first true haunted attraction. Gibbs would also live in the house upstairs above the attraction during his time operating the haunted mansion at Prudhomme's. The thing the haunted house was known for, as all Gibbs' subsequent attractions would be, was that the actors actually touched guests, poking and prodding them in the pitch darkness and grabbing their ankles as they walked past. The attraction was notoriously scary, and quickly became a rite of passage for Niagara Falls teens. Its extreme nature and the live actors' dedication to intensity provided an unrelenting experience through the twisting corridors of the old building. Despite the aging structure and maze-like nature of the attraction, Gibbs always had a strong mind for safety, stating, "What I want is a safe place that looks terrible," in the initial proposal to the planning committee of Lincoln. This ahead of its time thinking wouldn't become widespread in the haunted attraction industry until the tragic 1984 haunted castle fire at Six Flags Great Adventure in the States, which killed 8 teenagers. Perhaps if the operators had been thinking like Gibbs, it could have been avoided. The live actors actually touching and poking guests was both ahead of its time and a relic of it. While it's trendy for many haunted attractions today to have guests sign waivers before actors physically interact with them, and it was perhaps something that occurred without any thought to the matter in the haunts of the 70s, the haunted house fell somewhere in the middle. The era it existed in and the identity of the attraction made it completely unexpected, as no other permanent haunted attraction in the area at that time had actors physically interact with guests. Yet it wasn't at a time when people would be likely to turn around and sue over a small bruise yet. With his first true attraction a massive success, Gibbs would leave the world of corporate business behind to focus entirely on the amusement industry, taking the same concept and pushing it even further to create a successor to the haunted house. The result was straight out of people's nightmares. Nightmares would open in 1984 on the first floor of the mall portion of Maple Leaf Village, a 4-story mall and outdoor amusement park located just off Niagara's popular Clifton Hill. It was Gibbs' first haunted house in a space he was able to completely design the layout of from scratch. The result would be a start-to-finish, relentless assault on the senses. The rooms and mazes in the attraction were lit only by small red lights high on the wall close to the ceiling. As guests made their way through each area, the lights were their only guide through the illusions, strange sensations, jump scares, and being grabbed by the actors. Not only that, the rooms and corridors were able to switch and change, trapping guests in dead ends and forcing them to walk in circles. Perhaps the most memorable feature of Nightmares was Tommy the Tongue, a wet sponge on the end of a pole in the darkness which would lick guests' faces. The main scare in the attraction, however, was the goalie mask sporting actor who would chase guests around, and be one of the only seen elements in the whole attraction. For guests to be rescued from this nightmare, they had to yell out "Nightmares," admitting defeat. The scares would stop and the staff would lead you out a chicken exit, giving you a souvenir card of shame stating so. The attraction offered a totally different experience from other haunted attractions at the time, being focused almost entirely on psychological horror instead of physical sets and props. While there were illusions and disorienting mazes in other attractions like Castle Dracula, the Haunted House, and Maple Leaf Village Amusement Park's Mysterious Mansion, the charm of Nightmares was that you, the guest, was left to fill in the blanks as to what was chasing after you in the darkness, hence the name. While it wasn't necessarily better than the immense detail, scenery, and storytelling in other attractions, it was certainly different, and stood out in an almost apples and oranges kind of sense. Gibbs' head for business also showed in the attraction's marketing. The rite of passage aspect of the haunted house at Prudhomme's was also now marketed as a challenge at Nightmares, with color-coded cards being given to anyone who completed the attraction. The color on the card you received indicated how brave you were during the experience, with guests who barely scraped by receiving a pink card, guests who were visibly frightened but made it through receiving an orange card, brave guests receiving a green card, and only a completely unflinching, unbothered guest receiving the coveted blue card. This was a genius move on Gibbs' part, as it secured repeat patronage as guests tried to memorize and predict the jump scares inside in an attempt to stay stone-faced during the attraction. With clever live actors, however, this was easier said than done. Gibbs would operate Nightmares and the Haunted House simultaneously during the 1984 season, with the Haunted House's operations being transferred to Prudhomme's Landing Amusement Park themselves in 1985, so Gibbs could focus on Nightmares. The haunted house at Prudhomme's would eventually burn down at some point in the late 90s. Details are scarce on the blaze, but it appears nobody was injured in the incident, and there's some speculation that the attraction may have actually already been closed at that point. All that was left behind is this former chicken count sign. Nightmare's popularity led to it receiving a direct sequel shortly after it opened, right next door. The attraction moved to a larger space on the 3rd floor of the mall to accommodate the addition. The new attraction, Nightmares 2, would be an expansion of the original with the same kind of scares. However, if it was a separate ticket, or an expanded area of the pre-existing walkthrough is unknown. This would be quickly followed up once again with Nightmares 3: The Black Journey, a hybrid between a haunted house and an obstacle course. All three attractions would have the clever card completion system. The most notable feature of Nightmares 3 was the very first room. Guests would enter, the room would seal off behind them, and they would be left there for 10 minutes in pitch darkness and silence, feeling around the walls without even a red light on the wall to give them a sense that this was even supposed to be happening. This apparently seriously freaked people out, and understandably so. Some guests allegedly even thought they had somehow wandered into a backstage area between the walls and were sent into a panic. A small hatch along the bottom of the wall, opposite to the side of the room you entered through, would eventually open near the floor, and guests would have to crawl through the claustrophobic tube-like tunnel to the next area, all in pitch darkness. They would then have to navigate a series of psychologically and physically demanding obstacles of a similar nature, with various degrees of lighting. It was absolutely insane elements like this that were beginning to gain the Nightmares brand fame, as the extremity of the psychological torment was revolutionizing the industry. New attractions had started implementing similar features as early as the year after Nightmares opened, with Screamers also opening on the third floor of Maple Leaf Village in 1985 after an ex-Nightmares employee had a dispute with Gibbs, so decided to start his own attraction. One of the most obscure and undocumented aspects of Nightmares, however, would also be one of its most important, as it affected not just the haunted attraction industry, but also the world of mini-golf. Nightmares 4, that's F-O-R-E, opened as the fourth and final installment in the Nightmares brand, also on the third floor of the mall. It was a blacklight miniature golf course with horror theming, one of, if not the first, blacklight mini golf courses. You see these everywhere today, so it's crazy to think that possibly the first one has gone totally undocumented. It was also the first with a horror theme, a popular theme for blacklight mini golf courses today. According to the copyright database, a similar concept, named Monsterland Golf, was in the planning stages just a couple years earlier by Robert Dunham's legendary Wax Attract company, and would have used animatronic figures created from the same molds used to create the figures Wax Attract built for the House of Frankenstein and Castle Dracula locations. Unfortunately, Dunham passed away in 1985, before the attraction made it to the actual development stages, and it would never see the light of day. Now, it's unclear if Gibbs knew about Monsterland, where it was planned to be located if it was ever completed, or if the space it was meant for somehow evolved into Nightmares 4. No photos, footage, or promotional material from the attraction have surfaced, aside from a mention on the completion cards from Nightmares 3. This leaves us with really no information if Monsterland and Nightmares 4 were related in any way, or if it was just a coincidence, as we have nothing really to compare the two. Allegedly, the Nightmares attractions grew a little stale from their original glory over the years. As actors got less creative, employees began to give out the color-coded cards at random to anyone who completed the attraction, and other attractions such as Screamers began doing similar things. Maple Leaf Village itself would begin a rapid, somewhat planned demise beginning in the early 90s. Several tenants began to leave, with the amusement park behind the mall eventually closing in 1994, and the mall itself eventually closing in 1996 to become Casino Niagara. The heavy-duty wiring and power hookups the mall had for its many arcades, restaurants, and attractions were actually specifically designed for the mall to one day become a casino if it was no longer proving as profitable. Nightmares cleverly saw the writing on the wall back in '93, and Gibbs would begin plans to move the attraction to Victoria Avenue. By the time the attraction moved, the total chicken count between Nightmares 1, 2, and 3 was allegedly up to 43,610 guests. The new attraction would combine the elements from all three of these attractions and turn them into one 2-story mega attraction. The building on Victoria Avenue which Nightmares would move to would be the building formerly home to the original Castle Dracula from 1974 until it moved to Clifton Hill in 1977. The building dated back much further than that, however, originally being constructed as a Bell Telephone office building, and eventually becoming home to the Canadian Corps in the 1960s. It's unknown what the building was from when Castle Dracula moved in 1977 until 1993. Photographs from the early 80s show it seemingly abandoned. However, a news article talking about nightmares taking over the structure mentions something called Plantation formerly being there, presumably a restaurant that occupied a small portion of the space. Nightmares would have you believe the building was formerly the Cataract Coffin Factory, which, while great storytelling, isn't true, despite a majority of tourists actually believing it. Being the former home of Dracula, however, is surprisingly fairly close to that, so perhaps there is some tongue-in-cheek truth to it after all. This is where things get a little hazy. Frank LaPenna owned the building and allegedly provided Gibbs with roughly $80,000 of renovations. The building itself had notoriously been an issue with several of its past tenants. The Canadian Corps moved out due to the absolutely massive old building being much too large and costly to maintain. One reason Castle Dracula was sold off by its original creators and moved to Clifton Hill was due to how expensive it was to heat the building, and difficult to run power through it. It's unknown when exactly LaPenna came into possession of it, the state it was in, or what was there most recently as mentioned prior by the time Nightmares moved in. What is known is that some sort of financial dispute arose between Gibbs and LaPenna. Media coverage of the situation was extremely vague and legally tight-lipped, but whatever transpired, LaPenna eventually came out on top and owned the Nightmares business itself by 1994. It's unknown if the attraction operated at the Victoria Avenue location for the 1993 season under Gibbs, or remained closed while the dust was settling between the two parties. The attraction apparently opened for at least Halloween night 1993, but due to a massive snowstorm that night, only saw 10 guests. LaPenna would continue to build upon the attraction once it was his. The earliest evidence of the attraction actually in operation on Victoria Avenue full-time isn't until 1994. Whatever occurred wouldn't deter Gibbs, however, from being in the haunted attraction industry, and he would move to Wasaga Beach, another popular tourist town about an hour north of Toronto. In the space formerly home to another haunted attraction there, he would open Nightmares Wasaga Beach in 1997, a direct version of the Niagara Falls attraction done in the same style, which would last until 2005. As for Gibbs, he sold the attraction in 2000, celebrating a well-deserved early retirement and traveling North America in his motorhome with his wife. Back in Niagara Falls, LaPenna's new Nightmares was kicking things up a notch in an attempt to stay relevant in the face of similar attractions which had sprouted up since the original opened in 1984. The attraction would initially still operate on a completion card system, however only a chicken and I survived card would be given out instead of the color-coded bravery scale. Yelling Nightmares to be rescued from the experience was also a feature held over. The building itself is located on a slight hill, so at the front along Victoria Avenue, the first floor is level with the ground, whereas around the back of the building, the first floor would be a sort of underground basement and the second floor is level with the ground. The front half of the first floor was occupied by Frank's Steakhouse for years, a popular local restaurant that would later expand out the side of the building, and the back half of the first floor was home to the lower level of Castle Dracula during its tenure there. You entered Castle Dracula through a door on Victoria Avenue, then were immediately greeted with the stairs up to the lobby, gift shop, and arcade on the second floor, exactly where the Nightmares lobby is today. Nightmares, however, doesn't take you down to a lower level on the first floor, only occupying the top 2 floors of the space. It remains a mystery if the former lower level of the original Castle Dracula still exists abandoned under Nightmares, but the less exciting reality is that it probably became an expanded area of the restaurant years ago. Frank's eventually became a place called Carlos O'Brien's, which was what it was at the time that Nightmares moved in. Like Castle Dracula before it, guests enter Nightmares through a door on Victoria Avenue. However, it's now under a giant Gothic stone facade complete with a massive fiberglass Grim Reaper with glowing eyes. After passing a coffin display in the front window, guests traverse upstairs to the lobby and gift shop. Live screams of guests were originally broadcast on speakers both in the lobby and outside the attraction. However, this was eventually discontinued, assumingly due to the fact that guests let an array of expletives out while being scared senseless. The front window displays and walls in the lobby would be repainted in the mid-2000s, going for a more realistic look. However, it just can't compete with the charm of this blacklight paint that could originally be found in the attraction. After buying your ticket, you then venture upstairs to the top floor and begin your journey. The attraction now features the aforementioned story of being the abandoned coffin factory, originally deemed the Cataract Casket Company, but later changed to the Cataract Coffin Company at some point early in the location's life. Nightmares has fully embraced this, officially becoming Nightmare's Fear Factory in the late 90s. In a genius way to provide story and a theme to an attraction based almost entirely on pitch darkness and psychological terror, the majority of its storytelling exists in its promotional material. No brochures from the attraction feature photos of the interior, and photography and filming is forbidden. And the story never deviated from that the building is in fact haunted and was formerly a coffin factory, even to the press. This has created a cloud of mystery around how exactly the contents of the attraction have changed around over the years since the move to Victoria Avenue, if at all. In one of the only pieces of media discussing the attraction as not being a real haunted factory, the 1994 newspaper article on the attraction moving to Victoria Avenue provides some insight into the creation of the scares. LaPena was a contractor, not a haunted attraction designer or amusement operator, but apparently had a blast reworking the attraction and seeing how extreme he could take things. Several elements have been kept from the original Nightmares attractions in Maple Leaf Village, including the red guiding lights, the crawl-through tunnel, Tommy the Tongue, although he no longer has a name, and the dead end room, although they don't leave you in there for an insane 10 minutes like its original incarnation. New additions included bars which actors hit electrified poles on to create sparks, a room with inflatable walls that close in on you on either side, and most famous of all, the car. Nightmares features a car bumper and headlights on the wall beside guests at one point in the attraction, with a camera located directly above that takes a photo at the exact moment the headlights turn on and an unbelievably loud car horn blares. The photo of you and your friends in a raw state of petrified horror can be purchased in the gift shop. This gimmick was always popular dating back to the location's opening in the 90s. However, following the rise of mainstream social media in the late 2000s, it absolutely exploded. This simple effect, used in dark rides as far back as the 1950s, took the already popular attraction and propelled it into the international spotlight when coupled with the hidden camera and the power of the internet. When the photos began circulating online, so did tales of the intensity of the attraction, as well as people's stretched truths and misconceptions of what they had just been through. Tales of the attraction, as well as its story of being located in a former coffin factory, spread like wildfire, and people started traveling to the falls for the attraction alone, something a haunted attraction hadn't accomplished since the House of Frankenstein and Castle Dracula back in the 70s. It may have been years ahead of its time and taken a while to reach the fame that it has, but Nightmares ended up being savvy to trends and technology the same way Niagara's other iconic attractions were in the eras when they debuted. This has secured it as a mainstay Niagara Falls classic, a well-deserved spot for an attraction whose roots lie not in a haunted coffin factory, but a humble, charity-run Halloween haunted house in an Oshawa farm field in the 1960s. If you enjoyed this mini documentary, please like and subscribe, as it greatly helps against YouTube's algorithm and allows this important historical information to reach a larger audience. If you want to learn more about Nightmares and other attractions in Niagara Falls and abroad, check out my website, Canadian Amusement History. There you can view history pages on attractions, view historical photos and videos, and more. Thank you for watching.